Welcome to Sovereign Reality with Natalie, a podcast for women done playing small. I'm Natalie, metaphysical guide and metaphorical keeper of the flame. Each week, we will channel the power of a different goddess, her myth, her message, and her medicine, so that you can rise, reclaim, and remember who the hell you are. The world doesn't need you quiet, babe. It needs you lit up. So let's rise. Welcome back, loves. All right, I have to be honest with you. When I first started reading about Inanna and I started drawing the parallels between her story and the Bible, I got a little irritated. Like, why on earth was this goddess's story handed off to a man? Kind of irritated. Because here's the truth. Inanna is basically the original descent and resurrection story. Long before Jesus or any male savior archetype, she goes down into the underworld, dies, and comes back. And over time, her story got buried, rewritten, and repackaged. The themes didn't disappear, they just got gender swapped. And that, my friends, felt incredibly frustrating. But I'm not just here to vent. I do want to reclaim her voice and share her story with you because it's fierce and it's wild and it's still incredibly relevant. Inanna was worshipped in ancient Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. Her name means Lady of Heaven, and she was the goddess of love, sexuality, fertility, and power. But she wasn't delicate or one-dimensional. She was bold, messy, passionate, and unapologetically powerful. In a world that later tried to categorize women as either pure or tempting, Inanna embodied the full spectrum of feminine energy: love, warrior, mourner, queen. Her most famous story is her descent into the underworld, ruled by her sister, Ereshkigal. But this wasn't like a casual visit. It's not like she was going down there to have a movie night with her sister. This underworld had gates, 7 of them to be exact, and it had rules. So you can't just like waltz in carrying your full power, okay? It doesn't work that way. And at each of the 7 gates, Inanna had to surrender something: her crown, her jewelry, her scepter, her robe. But like, these weren't just things. They were symbols of her identity, her authority, her ego. And every gate demanded something from her, and only by letting go could she pass. So by the time she reaches her sister, she's stripped completely bare. She's naked and vulnerable. And then her sister, does what sisters do and kills her. Just kidding. But yes, she really did kill her. Essentially, Inanna hangs lifeless for 3 days and 3 nights. It's brutal, and yet she rises again. She comes back transformed, carrying the wisdom of the descent. So I'm going to just stop us here for a second, because this story is so symbolic of a spiritual awakening. If you've ever had one, then you know what I'm talking about. This descent into the underworld and being stripped bare and letting go of all of these things, right? All of these beliefs that you have clung to, all of this conditioning, all of this stuff that was given to you, handed to you, you took on, you believed, you repeated, any of the things that you clung to. It requires sacrifice in order to be reborn. The descent into your own darkness. None of it feels good. None of it feels like sunshine and rainbows and butterflies. Spiritual awakenings are challenging. They challenge everything you thought you knew, everything that you conditioned yourself to believe in, to think was the right thing. It's thrown in your face to really look at, and then you're like, is it? Is this what I'm really doing with my life? Is this like, there's got to be more to this, right? There's got to be more. That was my questioning and my journey anyway. But, I can say that I have met several people who have gone through a very intense spiritual awakening, and we've all come out saying the same thing, that it's not easy. It's not sunshine and rainbows. It's not glitter and ponies and unicorns dancing around. It's an ego death over and over and over and over. And anybody who is willing to let their egos die that many times to be that transformed only brings about wisdom from your descent, open-mindedness, and hopefully a greater clarity around your purpose, your life, the direction you're headed in, and everything in between. That said, there is also a story in here about boundaries and the importance of them. The underworld in this story has both rules and it has 7 gates. If we look at the 7 gates, we can see that they are literal lessons in surrender. You don't get to cross thresholds without respect and without release. You can't carry your ego into a spiritual awakening. The two don't fit together. You have to leave bits of yourself behind if you want to cross that threshold. And Ereshkigal, she is the ultimate boundary. She looks at Inanna and says, in my realm, everyone is equal. Everyone is stripped bare. Even you, the goddess of heaven. In other words, death doesn't negotiate. And when you're going through a spiritual awakening, your ego death is imminent. It has to happen. But then we can look at Inanna herself, and throughout her story, she tests boundaries all the time. She seduced, stole, tricked, and she pushed the limits wherever she could. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it blew up in her face. But every time she crossed a line, consequences followed. So she shows us boundaries from both sides, how they protect you when respected, and how fiercely they bite when ignored. So I don't know about you, but perhaps you can think of times in your own life where you have tested someone else's boundaries, or someone has tested yours, and the consequences that followed from both sides. Whether you were the one testing the boundary or was that person, how did you respond? How did they respond? What happened after that? Many of us grew up in situations where we were not taught how to implement boundaries. Maybe you are a chronic people pleaser, and how has that worked for you in your life? Have you worked on strengthening, setting boundaries, and adhering to them? What happens when you don't uphold your own boundaries? How do you feel? Do you get so angry at the other person for crossing them, or are you more mad at yourself for letting them? And that kind of leads me into her husband, Dumuzi, and her. Forgive me, I don't fully know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but essentially after she rises, the demons of the underworld demand a replacement, someone to take her place. So she goes around to see who is mourning her absence and who is honoring her descent. She finds that most people do, and so she spares them. But then she finds Dumuzi, who's like living his best life. Basically just like acting as though nothing has happened. He's sitting in his throne, dressed to the nines, living like she never left. And here comes the boundary moment. She basically looks at him and she says, essentially, you couldn't hold my absence. You don't deserve my presence. And she hands him over to the underworld. That's what I'm talking about. That said, later the myth does soften a bit and his sister steps in to share his fate, explaining why he spends half the year in the underworld and half above, matching the barren and fertile seasons. But the lesson is crystal clear. Sometimes boundaries mean refusing to keep pouring yourself into someone who can't even honor your absence. And how many of us have done that? How many of us have given and given and given to a situation, basically pouring from an empty cup, either in hopes that that person will reciprocate or respond in the way that we want at some point, that we end up basically like draining ourselves. And going back to what I said earlier about boundaries, and sometimes you weren't taught how to create them or uphold them. And so I feel like creating boundaries, if you're newer at it, if it's a newer practice for you, can sometimes feel like it's not a loving thing when it's actually the most loving thing that you can do. Someone put it this way to me at one point. If you look at your relationship, like especially, I'm assuming it's women listening to this podcast, when it comes to men, you essentially have to do what you would do with like a 2-year-old. You know, they're going to test those boundaries. They're going to keep testing them and you have to uphold them, because the more you let them get away with things, the more they're going to walk all over you in the end. And so the most loving thing you can do is set the boundary gently, of course, and adhere to that boundary. And once it's crossed, you've already laid out the consequences and you follow through with the consequences. If you don't follow through with the consequences, guess what? Just like a little kid, they're not going to believe you going forward. Same thing when you are in a relationship with somebody, especially an adult. Adults know better. So you set the boundary. It is the most loving thing that you can do for yourself and do for them, because it keeps you both happy. And hopefully they are doing the same with you and you are respecting and honoring their boundary. Hopefully it's an equal give and take. As you know, with this podcast, I do like to talk a little bit about how the patriarchy silences the goddess's voice. This is where things get more interesting to me and more infuriating at the same time. But Inanna's story was central to the ancient world. She was worshipped widely honored in hymns and poems. But over time, as patriarchal systems rose, Babylonian, then later Judeo-Christian traditions, her voice was pushed aside. The themes of her story didn't disappear, they were just rebranded. Her descent became the temple for later resurrection myths, but the female face of it was what was erased. Her sexuality, her power, and her sovereignty were all qualities that threatened patriarchal order and were either demonized or completely stripped away. So what we're left with is a cultural memory where the male hero rises, but the goddess who first showed us the way, she's forgotten. And this is why telling her story now matters. It's not just about history, it's about reclaiming a voice that was intentionally silenced. In my humble opinion, Inanna is the embodiment of the full spectrum of feminine power. She teaches us that boundaries are fences. They protect us, they demand respect, and they guide our transformation. She also reminds us that relationships require reciprocity, that sovereignty sometimes looks like walking away, and that death, whether literal or symbolic, is always followed by rebirth. So now let's do this juicy little ritual that I'm calling the 7 strips of Inanna. It's simple and embodied, and it's hopefully going to help you reclaim your power and your sovereignty. What you will need for this ritual are 7 small slips of paper or sticky notes. You'll need a pen, a bowl or box to collect them, and then a little space, of course, where you can move. As always, this ritual will be included in the show notes, so feel free to just pop back in and read those. If you're driving and you don't have time to fast forward to the podcast or whatever the case may be, those steps are here for you, okay? The first thing you're going to do is set the space. So sitting comfortably with your 7 slips of paper, I invite you to take 3 deep breaths and call Inanna into your space. You'll simply repeat, Inanna, she who descends and rises. I call on your fierce presence now. On each slip of paper, I invite you to write one thing that you're ready to release. That can be old identity, fear, a toxic relationship, outdated belief, people-pleasing, shame around sexuality, or anything else that just feels heavy or false. If you want, you can just pause the podcast here and write, come back when you're ready. After you have everything written, you're going to stand up and imagine yourself at the first gate. You'll hold the first slip to your body and then drop it into the bowl or box as if you're leaving it behind. And then you'll repeat that for each slip, one by one. By the 7th, imagine yourself stripped down, raw and open. If it's helpful, you can always take one step with each slip. That way it feels like you're descending. It's a metaphorical descent. Once you have done this with all 7 strips, you can either stand or sit in stillness and just feel the rawness. And I invite you to ask yourself, what is left when I release all of this? Who am I without the masks? When you're ready, place your hands on your heart and speak aloud. Like Inanna, I descend. Like Inanna, I rise. Like Inanna, I reclaim my sovereignty. Take 3 deep breaths, imagining your energy returning brighter, fuller, and freer. You're going to keep the slips of paper in the bowl or the box for 3 days, mirroring Inanna's 3 nights, and then dispose of them. So you can either burn them safely in a burn bowl, or if you have like a fire pit or something, or you can shred them or recycle them, whatever feels right. But that's the ritual. That's what you're going to do. And again, it's going to be in the show notes, so feel free to come read it if you don't want to listen to the full podcast again or have to fast forward through all of this. So that's Inanna, the Lady of Heaven, the goddess of descent and return, the fierce teacher of boundaries and sovereignty. She teaches us that death is never the end. Boundaries shape transformation, and sovereignty is choosing who and what rises with us. If today's episode stirred something inside of you, share it with a fellow goddess, a soul sister, or a babe ready to rise. Be sure to follow me for more Sacred Rebellion on TikTok and Instagram at Sovereign with Natalie. And of course, for deeper resources and free rituals, you can sign up for my email list at www.sovereignsanctuary.space. Thanks for spending this time with me and Inanna today. If you felt her energy stirring something inside of you, hold on to that. And join me next week as we connect with Kuan Yin, exploring compassion, mercy, and the ways her energy can guide your sovereignty and self-love. Until next time, stay powerful, stay sovereign, and keep rising, because the world doesn't need you quiet, babe. That's your divine download for the week. If this episode lit your fire, share it. Leave a review and subscribe so the flame keeps burning bright. If you want more Sacred Rebellion, you can come find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sovereign with Natalie. Remember, you are the storm. You are sovereign. Stay wild, stay sacred, and keep rising.